Around a year ago, we converted as well as painted up a Canadian combat patrol, and in these series of videos, we mentioned naturally needing to make a leader for future, and we're tackling that today. This leader, naturally, needs to be Canadian, but beyond that, we ideally want someone of YouTube and TV fame. And no, we're not going for this guy. This guy is probably liked by his HR department, so that's not good enough for us. Instead, we're going for this guy. Yes, we're taking the forced parasocial relationship that LTT tried to force on us all, and we're cranking that up a little bit further, taking LTT and mixing it with Warhammer by taking Leontus and Linus, merging them together to get Linuntus. And that merge job is going to be perfect, just like this perfect segue to our sponsor. The subscribe button. Did you know that there are many different ways to support the channel, but some of the easiest and most efficient is to subscribe, hit the like, and hit the share button. Let's jump back to the video. Let's jump straight into building the base. We are aiming for this to be both a gaming model as well as a small scene. And in order to achieve this, we can dual mount some bases. Taking our gaming sized base, we want to grab another slightly larger base, which is where we can build out the majority of our scene. We can apply a thin cork sheet to the base before proceeding to cut a hole into that cork to accommodate the smaller gaming base, which is where we are going to mount Linuntus. This leaves us with a disc of cork from the hole that we've just cut, which naturally can be glued onto the gaming base. Our Linuntus model is going to be going onto the gaming base, as that is what we need for gaming. However, in regards to the larger base that's going to accommodate the scene, we need to still make sure that at least 51% of the overall base size is allocated to our Linuntus model, because we need to make sure that the overall scene kind of is directed towards that character. So overall, that's a nice proportion, at least 51% straight down the middle with the base sizes, and you're probably all good. From there, we can build out the texture of our base and any other details we want to add to the base. We are going to be using some black lava paste in order to give us a slight bump texture to the floor. Coming up, we are going to be using a little bit of green stuff, so any spare green stuff can also be pushed onto the base, giving us some slightly more rough areas. With all of that done, we can start to add a few accessories made out of plastic. Due to having previously made a combat patrol of various Militarum kits, we can use the spares from there to build out a couple of elements. The first being 2 attendees for the base. These are made from a combination of Horus Heresy and 40k Militarum kits. The other elements were built out to essentially make a framework of a portable PC, and we can build this framework PC essentially out of various elements from the mortar kit. So we've got a nice frame, a battery, as well as a screen section. I appreciate that the wargaming circle and the IT circle may not 100% overlap. There's going to be some overlap because of the gaming nature. There'll be a couple of ploofs out there like myself. However, for anyone that happens to not know who we're memeing on for this video, this is based around Linus Tech Tips or Linus Media Group, and they are a channel that, to be honest, I've watched for far too many years, which is why I'm happy to make this video. I quite like the channel. I've watched it for a long time. They are makers of great resources, great content, and I hear great screwdrivers. Hopefully this entire video is going to be received in good jest, which is how it's intended. But equally, I'm not quite happy to include a lot of the LTT staff because, unlike Linus, who's an ultimate beneficiary of the entire organization, they, to my understanding, are not. So I don't find it quite as fair to, well, I don't find it fair to pick on anyone, to be fair, but in good jest, it's, in my mind, Linus is fairer game than everyone else. With that said, though, there are a couple of people that I'm going to need to include on this project, and that is the rest of the LDL or the DLL crew or the WAN crew, depending how you decide to refer to them. Basically, we're adding Dan and Luke into the diorama. Then what we can do is take the base out to be sprayed in a red to white zenithal before we start painting. In regards to painting, we are going to lather the base initially with a relatively thick green wash, which will start to add a little bit of darkness, turn some of the more red areas into a darker brown, while also giving us a slightly more grassy feeling tone across the overall base. With that done, we can follow it up with a light brown, which can be applied through a dry brush. which is going to start to add that feeling of dirt and mud to our green grass shades from before. With all the dry brushing done, we can then apply a relatively heavy black wash, which will nicely recess shade all of the scene. We then need to come in and paint the various accessories that we added to the base. There's not much to cover here really. In regards to the PC and the mic, we were going around and painting these elements in golds and blacks, while the LTT backpack, which was on the floor next to the PC, we applied a brown contrast layer and then came in, not spending a lot of time, but making sure that we do a quick highlight. And that's because for the LTT backpack, we need to make 100% sure that it has at least 2 layers. Now that we've done some painting, we are going to start to add a little bit of foliage. And for this, the easiest thing to do is to add some grass in the form of static grass. Obviously, we need to take a few precautions here. Where we are planning to mount our Linuntus model, as well as a path to get to that location, we need to make sure that we don't apply any glue or stick any grass down here. That's because, as we know, this guy's a gamer. He don't touch no grass. Grass has never been touched. When this man goes camping, he films it. No grass. To achieve this, we can apply a coat of clear PVA, covering all of the areas that we want there to be grass. Then, using either a static grass applicator or a static grass shake bottle, we can apply our static grass. Here, we're using 3 or 4 different colours and lengths of static grass, all mixed into one to give us a little bit of variation. With one layer down across all of our glue, while this is drying, we can spread around some slightly denser petal flock in various colours, which will help to represent flowers. Sealing it all in by thinning down some clear PVA with some water and spraying it over the top. This sealing PVA can also be used to adhere our last round of static grass, applied in the exact same way as prior, using either our applicator or spray bottle. We can go across the previous areas that we've applied glue, and this will help to blend those flowers into the flock so they don't just look stuck on the top. We can essentially rinse and repeat this as many times as we want until we're happy with the outcome. To help out with the next steps, we can take our static grass mix and make up a few grass tufts. And we're going to do this by applying small blobs of PVA onto a silicone mat. Then fully covering all of the mat with static grass, leaving it to dry overnight. These can then be peeled away from the silicone mat in the morning and then stuck in tactical locations, the same as we would use any sort of grass tuft. We are using these mainly to stack up a large pile of grass on the side of the base, allowing us to slightly stain the top of it with either brown or black ink before we add a flame effect, showing that this is the grass that has been removed from Linuntus's path and then dutifully burned. It's at this point that we can paint and mount our Luke and Dan characters onto the base. I clearly haven't gone over how to paint those 2 models in this video, and that's because we covered it in another video. The original one where we painted up the troops is exactly how we painted up Dan and Luke in this video. And as we know, Dan and Luke, they are employees, they are help, they are expendable, some may say. Let's jump back into the important bit, and that is the main conversion, and where I hope my primary and chief vision for this project comes to life. Let's tackle the person first. To be honest, the majority of this kit went together exactly like normal, as per the instructions. The only real change is that we did a head swap, which we will come back to, as well as we needed to remove the sword. Easily done with a pair of clippers or a knife, we can cut off the blade and then replace it with something more suitable. By using a pin vise and a very small wire, we can have our Linuntus holding aloft a screwdriver. Whereas for the head, we are actually going to be swapping out the normal head for a slightly oversized but bold Marine's head. And this allows us to sculpt on a beanie using a little bit of green stuff, making it a lot easier to match heads, because at this point we only need a head with a beard because we're covering it with a beanie. Sadly, in the world of 40k, I don't think hydrofacials are a thing, but that does mean that we have the advantage of the character being able to have his long lost and much beloved beard. So that makes that a lot easier. The only real other type of amendment that we made to the model is we cut the reins off of the left hand, which he's holding, because they mount to the horse, which is his normal mount. In this case, we're actually going to be swapping that mount out, because rather than a majestic horse, we need some distinctly more Canadian. So we're going for a moose. Yes, a moose. We scoured the web for a roughly accurately sized moose. Initially, we were going to just head swap this for the mount, but it turns out Linuntus fits really well onto this mount, meaning we can use a little bit of green stuff to essentially secure the seat and give him kind of a saddle that you're not going to see anyway, as well as mount a section of luggage onto the hindquarters of the moose. Lastly, we can make up some straps, which we will wrap around the moose's antlers and then mount them into the left hand of Linuntus. These can be done out of green stuff. This gives us everything we need sorted for the build, and we can take all of the components out and give them a spraying. Kicking it off with the moose, we can base coat the main fur sections using a dark brown contrast, while elements such as the face and the legs can get a slightly lighter flesh contrast application. Now we're able to add a little bit of variation across the moose by taking a couple varying tones of brown and applying splodges and spots of these colours across the various hair elements, giving a mottled base across the fur and the skin. I will admit, at this point, the moose is looking a little bit ragged and worn down, but we're going to be fixing that in a second by coming in with a couple of dry brush layers to brighten everything up and freshen everything up a little bit. See, not every single one of these cuts has to have some sort of meme or joke in it. We can dry brush the entire moose. All of the features from face to tail can get a light dry brush of a typical dirt brown, which can then be followed up with a further paler dusty yellow as our brightest hair colour, harmonising and slightly toning everything down with a final wash of a dark muddy green. This finishes off the moose in body, but now we have the accessories that we've added across the model. These are, to be honest, nice and simple. We have the tech sack, which is going to be given a quick layer of white, followed up with a white contrast, and then once that contrast is dried, highlighted back up using the white. We essentially approached the LTT water bottle, which is held in a little military pouch at the back, in the same way. We painted it white, going through the exact same process. The only difference is we made sure to come in and paint the cap of the water bottle with a black contrast, making sure that it matched the LTT water bottle caps, which I believe entirely come in black. I may be wrong. But there is one additional feature on there that we haven't touched on, and it's the bedroll, except in this case, it's not a bedroll. We are going to be painting up an imitation of the LTT desk pad. Naturally, we're aiming for the Northern Lights LTT desk pad. So first, we need to add a base coat to the roll, which is going to be black. Once that is dry, we can start to grab our selection of tones. Starting with a blue, we can pick one side and then start to trace on some small triangles in various different layers and sizes. That essentially nicely solves one side of the desk pad. So all we need to do is flip the model around and then grab our remaining colours, which come in the form of pink, green, orange and purple. These can then be lightly lined and dotted vertically across the pad towards the triangles that we've just painted, working through the various colours. And hopefully, once we're finished, this will create a nice looking, very miniature LTT desk pad. Then we have the painting of the little man himself, and for this we're going to be blending the initial Canadian Combat Patrol scheme and the LTT brand, which essentially results in us taking a majority of our red accents and shifting them towards the orange, and we're also going to be bringing in some more blacks as a secondary colour. I tend to find it easiest to start off by blocking out the majority of the colours in any areas that we want. Conveniently, we have a pre-mix for the jeans and the boots colour. We're not going to be changing his feet into sandals, regardless of how amusing it would have been. These contrasts were made and bottled when we first painted the first unit, so that we had some consistency across the let's say, less cared about areas. Then for the plate armor, we are going to be coming in and using a black contrast. The accents on this model are going to be orange, meaning that the black plate will help the orange insignia pop. For elements like the top, we are going to be coming in with a red contrast before we move to the white elements. Here we're looking at things like the gloves as well as a few other accessories, and this is very similar to how we painted the whites earlier. We are going to be giving them a rough white layer before we come in and follow it up with a application of a white contrast. There are a couple of other elements that we need to tackle that won't really have much effect on the overall look. These are things like the waist drapery. These we went for a brown, slowly highlighting up through various applications using the same orange that we're going to use for the accent later on. Bringing these colors together later and slowly so that they blend nicely across the model. It will take a couple of passes, slowly going up to this highlight orange from our brown, but once we get to a point that we're happy with, we can slightly darken it down with a dark green wash at the end of the phase. We can now start highlighting all of the areas that we've just base coated, and for this video I'm going to just be following one area through to completion and then moving on to the next, though in reality we bounced back and forth a little bit as areas were drying. So if you notice one area gets painted and then suddenly becomes unpainted, that's the reason. First, for the highlights, we can tackle our whites. Thinning a white layer, we can go over and edge highlight all of the areas which we applied our white contrast to. But we also want to carefully pick out any of the trims or insignias ready for later steps, which is where we're going to be grabbing a bright orange and then applying 2 thin layers of this across all of our areas of trim that we've just painted white. For our various red areas, we can come in and touch this up quickly, starting from a red contrast, which we painted earlier. We can apply a wash of a dark red to give us a little bit of depth to the areas before we come in with a quick highlight, which is going to be made from a mix of our red contrast and the orange trim color. Moving across to the blues and the blacks, which have been bundled in the same area because they're both essentially getting the same second stage, which is a very quick highlight using a medium to dark blue. On the trousers, these highlights are going to be relatively large and soft, whereas on the armor plates, we are aiming for sharper, thinner highlights. We will be giving the armor sections a wash of black later on, but first what we need to do is grab a gold or a bronze tone and use this to pick out any of the metal areas, because we want to hit these metal areas with a black wash as well, so we might as well get them up to speed at this point. Now, to be fair, beyond the head and the screwdriver, the only real thing left to paint on this model is the cape itself. And I don't think Linuntus would buy his own cape. He would, if he needed to get a cape, he would get it sponsored. And I reckon D-Brand would still be around in the 40,000th year and therefore able to sponsor his cape. Okay, so we're now most of the way through the video, so hopefully you've got some value, but I do need to make some disclaimers. I haven't been sponsored by anyone for this video. No money has changed hands. I haven't approached or been approached by Linus Media Group, Creator Warehouse, Floatplane, D-Brand, Framework, any of the various people that I've kind of mentioned or memed on in this video. There's been no pre-agreed thing. I just am aware that it's kind of a little bit sales pitchy sometimes, and that's kind of a meme on how they push their products, which I do like, but it's slightly different to my normal style. And I just want to make sure that you're aware that this change isn't because someone's offered me money. It's because it's part of the theme of the video. If you do want me to push things in order for money, that's perfectly fine. I can point out that we do have a newly launched memberships, which has benefits and bonuses that you can potentially partake in. I could bring that up all of the time if I wanted, but we're not going to do that. We're going to focus on the painting. We're now going to paint the cape, and we can do this on 2 sides. First, we have the inside of the cloak, and here we are going to paint this up white using the exact same method as we did for all of the other white elements on this model. But this time, once the white is dry, what we're going to do is grab a pencil and lightly trace out the word D brand on the inside of the cloak. Once that is positioned and correct, what we can do is grab a red contrast paint and then essentially trace this and fill in the words that we've written onto the inside cape. Then what we're going to do is flip the cape over and we can go for a stealth black look on the back. To achieve this, what we're going to do is first apply a relatively thick black contrast. Once that's dry, we can follow it up with some applications of a neutral grey. The twist in the highlighting here is that we're going to be creating a scratchy highlight on the majority of the flat panels. Normally to do this, we may do stippling or cross-hatching, but rather here, what we're going to be doing is carefully covering the area in many small LTTs. We want to try and avoid not covering another LTT on the first layer. We want to essentially aim for clear rows of LTT across the cape. This will allow us to come in with a black wash and cover the whole black cloak, which will naturally darken down the LTTs that we've already applied, compared to some more fresh LTTs applied in the grey. We can go around and apply a second coat of LTTs, and this time we're not as worried if they start to overlap, because this is going to build out that scratchy, worn texture. Once we've filled out the cape again with the LTTs, we can apply another black wash. This highlighting method essentially just requires a back and forth between those two elements, applying the LTTs and then applying a wash. The more applications of LTT passes that we do, we're going to get more of a kind of blurry, tattery sort of look, because we're going to have so many crosshatches from the LTTs being stacked over each other. For this particular model, I stopped at 2 applications of LTT so that we had a nice clear breakdown in certain areas of what it was meant to be. Obviously, if you're kind of doing this and wanting to actually build it out to make it look crosshatched, just repeat it more times and apply more washes, and every single time you'll get a little layer of depth on your overall blending and your highlighting through this method. We can now tackle the head of the model, which constitutes a hat, a face, and a beard. The beanie, or the hat, was painted in the same way as the black cloak, except instead of applying loads of teeny tiny LTTs, we just did an overbrush of the greys. The face, however, we did go over with a couple of layers. The first, we came in with a base coat of a warm skin tone, going over to the edge of the nose and the brow, highlighting those areas up with a paler skin tone once the base coat was dry. Once this highlight was dry, we can come in and apply a flesh wash, which will nicely build back in some colour as well as shade the recesses. With that dry, we're going to take the 2 skin tones we used for our base coat and our highlight, mix them together in a 50-50 ratio, and use this as a final highlight for the flesh. And to be honest, we kind of cheated with the beard. We painted it the same as the flesh, and then at the end of the process, just applied a thin brown contrast. That essentially finishes off the model for our LTT inspired leader of our Canadian Command Force. We'll go over and look at this model in a little bit more detail in a second. The only bit really that I haven't kind of mentioned is the screwdriver. The colour of the screwdriver I decided to paint was yellow pink with a black shaft. I essentially did the number 2 pencil screwdriver from the Elijah video because I thought that was quite a cool idea. So that's the screwdriver that this character is holding. Now, before we jump into the actual looking at the model, I know I've already mentioned it and I don't like bringing it up, but I kind of feel like I have to do some sort of an announcement video. And if I'm going to do an announcement video, why not hide it in another video about a channel that's very, very good at marketing? That seems like perfect logic. But as I said, and you may have seen throughout various pop-ups in this video, I have launched a membership for the channel that has various different tiers, and those tiers have various different perks. They are there if you want to use them, and I'm only highlighting them so that you are aware. It does naturally support the channel on a financial standpoint, but equally, if you want to support the channel, I would much rather equally just appreciate a like, subscribe, or a share. And if you are willing to join the membership and you want some of the perks, take full advantage of it. I feel it's better to put them there for you rather than just not have them and me decide that you don't want them. With that all said, that's enough of the please give me money, oh, I'm a poor YouTuber talk. and we can jump into looking at this model. Without further ado, we have Linuntus, Captain Solaris of the Canadian Special Tactical Assault Regiment. On this scene, we have multiple things. We have the dutiful Dan, collecting and burning any grass remotely near Linuntus in order to avoid his strategic anno mind being drawn away from the battle. We also have Luke, as always aware of the unnecessary sensitive information that Linuntus is sharing. He's ready to pull the plug in order to save everyone. And of course, we have little Linuntus riding forth on his noble steed with his screwdriver held aloft. To be honest, this has been a really fun project, not just the building, also the creation of this video. I hope it goes down well with all of you. If this does somehow creep beyond the normal mini painting and hobbyist world and somehow potentially across the pond up to the hat of America, which is the prime and noble country of Canada, then what I would just like to say is I've got a video here, which is how we made the original Combat Patrol, and you may want to check it out. It's really interesting. Don't miss it. Check it out there. Otherwise, you know where to find us. It's the same great channel at the same great time. I know, you thought I was going to steal Linus's outro from WAN. Not going to do that. I am above that. Bye!